Net Podcast. The Third Degree Net Podcast. The Third Degree Net Podcast. The Third Degree Net Podcast.
Hey there, just wanted to carve out a couple of seconds while you sat in traffic before the podcast. Just to remind you that Third Degree the Podcast is brought to you by Soccer90.com. Check out all of the FIFA World Cup new arrivals, including the US men's national team jerseys, tees, and scarves. In addition to that Yank stuff, Soccer90 has the new France and Brazil shirts, and most importantly, that gorgeous red away England shirt. So shop Soccer90.com today, and as listeners to this podcast, you get 20% off your purchase when you use the code Third Degree at checkout. Don't write that down, keep your eyes on the road, your ears on the podcast. Remember, some exclusions may apply.
Well, hello there, FC Dallas Curious fan. Welcome to episode number 180 of Third Degree, the podcast. Hi, it's me, Pitois, and yes, he is here. Attention, listeners, Dan Crooke is here. Howdy, Dan.
Hi, I like Pitois. It gives you like a little French kick, like, and Pitois.
What if I did the whole show as French Pitois?
Lionel Messi fucked up again.
That's the extent of my French person impersonation, by the way. And if I was, it would be French Pierre, would it not?
It would be I Surrender.
Okay. And your hero, my hero, everybody's hero, editor, founder, thirddegree.net, the good Buzz Carrick. Come in, Buzz.
Hi, Peter. I'm still flabbergasted that Dan made a surrender joke with the French at the top of the show.
Why not? We have over 1,000 years of history with them.
Yeah, fair enough.
Fair enough. Okay, so I know that probably the majority of anybody coming to the pod for this particular episode is highly anticipating the meat of what has been discussed in the last several days, which was the parting of ways of North Texas Soccer Club with Pa-Modou Kah. And Buzz has, at least on his Discord, has hinted that he has some insight and that he's not surprised by this in the least, and I think has some stories to tell. So we're going to make you wait, because who doesn't want to talk about Rapids 1, Good Guys 0?
Yeah, that was an abysmal performance. Not what you were looking for. Granted, they have a pretty good home record, and Dallas has a very bad record.
They didn't clearly listen to the previous episode where we spent a few minutes talking about momentum going into the playoffs.
Yeah.
Did they?
No, and I have it was in my three things, a pretty hot take about that lineup that made me, I'm not going to say mad, but I thought you just threw the game away. Which we can do when we break down the 11 here in a second. But I just want to say overall that was not the result you're looking for when you're 2 games from the playoffs. Forget about the wrapping up the home field advantage thing. It's just like you want to be on a roll, and even scoreline aside, what happened in that game and the mentality of that game is not what you wanted. And specifically in the post-game presser, for the part that I could understand in English, the coach talked about mentality, and he talked about a lack of ruthlessness, and I'm going to explain in a minute why that's his fault. So that's my hot take on that game.
Dan, I would love to hear your thoughts and recapping of said loss.
It was crap. It just looked awful. Jesus nullified by not having his 2 attacking partners around him, just Dyer struggling with Michael Barrios constantly. Nanu's defending on the goal. It was everything that it was everything that you wished to get away from this season.
And again, this is all about momentum going into the playoffs, at least in terms of my very ancient long-term experience of this, is that teams that have some sort of form, and this certainly wasn't the way to do it. And so, Buzz, I do think it all goes back to the coach making a decision on who to start and who to play.
Yep.
And that's where it kind of starts and ends, doesn't it?
It is, for sure. Now, he had his hands cuffed a certain way because of Ariela's red card and because of Velasco's injury. So he had some limitations there. He wanted to work Hedges back in. That's totally understandable, as he should want to do. That's fine. But then he made some rotational decisions. And when you make rotational decisions, you say to your team that this game's not quite as important or this opponent's not quite as good. When you're 2 games from the playoffs, those rotational decisions affect your mentality. Now, we've talked a lot about how this team on the road has a passive defensive mentality of killing the game for about 60 minutes. And then they make some moves and they go for it in the later stages of the game. But we've also talked about how you can be defensive and still be on the front foot and still be a progressive in your mentality. And when you change out a couple of players, notably rotating out Tuamasi for Nanu, notably rotating out Edwin Cerrillo for Facundo Quignon. Edwin is the for sure starter at this point. And for the most part, the major one was starting Khalil El-Mankour at left wing. Now, Khalil's a young player. He's a young guy who is, you hope, developing. But to this point in the season, he's played, 80 minutes total over the course of like 3 or 4 games in like 10-minute spurts. He is not a frontline contributor to this team. The easy and obvious best way to win that game, as demonstrated by the change they made in the 60th minute, is to start Leggett on the wing. Excuse me. You bring in Brandon Cervania to play in midfield with Paxton, something you did most of the year, and you move Leggett to wing, where he played most of the year for New England, and he's a very capable player to play out there. Then you still can play your 60-minute defensive and still go for it, but you've indicated to your team, if I'm putting out the best lineup to win this game, by rotating and playing someone who's never been in there at all, basically, you indicate to your team, this one's not very important. And that was the difference. The coach talked about how in the post-game press conference, he talked about ruthlessness. He talked about having the right mentality, how this is going to be like a playoff game where the chances are going to be limited and you have to take them when they come. And they didn't do those things. And for me, and I rarely say this, for me, this is 100% a choice of the formation, the choice of the starting 11, signaled to the team, perhaps unintentionally, not a big deal. And they lifted the pedal just enough to not win the game. And that was it. That was the decider.
So does this concern you about Nico as the coach of this team? I know that's kind of maybe a much too large a question, but you get where I'm coming from.
No.
Is that just inexperience? Maybe not understanding the playoffs?
Yeah, I think it's a little inexperienced. He's not really been a head coach very much other than, a reserve team way back in Spain. He's mostly been an assistant. So he also is still learning his team. He's still learning, in one season, learning what these guys are like, how they react, how to push buttons. I think it's just a one-game mistake, a one-game mentality, probably hoping that he had other guys that he could rely on. Maybe he talks himself into Nanu sort of as a last, okay, the season's winding down. Can I get anything out of this guy? Maybe Edwin's been busting it lately. Maybe I'll give him a little. I'm sure he had thought processes behind all of it. Mm-hmm. But when you combine it all together, it makes the team just have that missing little bit, that little extra. And I think you could see it most obviously actually in Jesus, who in this game in particular is feeling so much pressure because as Dan mentioned, Areola and Velasco are both missing. So he's feeling added pressure, and he's just the tiniest bit off. He's hitting the post instead of finishing. He's flubbing a touch, so it bounces away a foot and a half, and he doesn't get a shot off. There's another one where it gets caught underneath him. 3 or 4 of those moments where all season long he's been burying those things. He instead muffs. Now, he would probably tell you that it wasn't that, but when you have something like this with the lineup, in my opinion, happen, and then you get the performance you get, I think there's a direct correlation there.
I wonder, do you guys have any opinion? We talk about, having a good run of form or being hot going into the playoffs. How far back do you think? I'm sitting here looking at the form table, and I'm just wondering how many games back. Is it like the last game you played? Is it the last 10 games you played?
I'd be interested to hear Dan take, but I'll say it's about 3 or 4. You want to be, in a pretty comfortable groove over about a month of play, which is what 4 games is.
Okay, so before Dan answers, and Dan, I'm going to say this because I think this will help you form your answer, which is, so do we feel like you just have a positive, like 2 of the 4 wins, or does it need to be 3 of the 4 or all 4? What would be considered a really good run of form going into the playoffs?
I don't even think wins come into it to a degree. I think just positive performances. You want to at least string together 2 or 3 just so that, everything's flowing right. I know the adage is you're only as good as your last game, but actually, a perfect example. At Luton, Elijah Adebayo, the striker that was linked with Newcastle, he hadn't scored yet all season. 11 games, no goals. He hit the crossbar against Hull last weekend, and the defender turned it in. And he finally kind of got that little bit of momentum. And then today he scores 2 goals, and he's like, okay, great, no more after that. After hitting the crossbar, I had no sleepless nights, no nothing. It wasn't weighing on my mind. I kind of knew things were getting back to normal. That's all it took. It could be a case of they just need to blow it out against SKC and they're all good to go. But you would definitely like to see 2 or 3 good games for those players that are maybe a little bit more delicate in their confidence.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a lot, as Dan said, about how you feel about yourself. Like Dallas is a pretty good team, so they're going to look at this Colorado game and like, oh man, we let that slip away. So it's more frustration in that moment rather than like, oh my God, we're bad. It'll depend on who your opponents are. Depends on, like, you could consider a tie against LAFC on the road. You'd feel really good about that, right? So it just depends on who you're doing, and you want to feel like we can play the way we want to play. We can get a goal when we need one. We're not making dumb mistakes. Those are the kinds of things that you want. It doesn't have to be for wins, It just needs to be positivity, a role, playing the way we want to play, getting the goals when we need them, not making dumb mistakes, not giving up dumb fouls, not getting hurt, making poor decisions. All that goes into feeling good about yourself as you roll into the playoffs.
It's interesting because if I look at the form guide, I think I'm doing this because I want to feel good about going into the playoffs. There really aren't a lot of the 14 teams that are looking good at this particular moment. LAFC's on a 2-game run, so everybody's got 1 game left at this point. We're recording this after the last set of games just happened on Wednesday night. The marvelous purple and pink of Orlando and Miami was great to look at. But LAFC's on a 2-game run. Philly's not won in their last 2, so they won't be in any kind of form. Montreal is one of the top teams. They're on a 3-game winning streak, and they play Miami next. Austin. They haven't won a game since their 3-0 win against RSL, and that's the only game they've won dating all the way back to their win over LAFC way back, which feels like a million years ago. NYCFC are on a 2-game streak, so that's okay. Red Bull, 2 losses in a row. Dallas hasn't won a game except for their 2-game streak in a bit. So the one team that is another one to look out for, Miami, won again tonight. I'm sorry, am I looking at this right now? That's no. Who is this?
Miami won tonight.
Yeah, but I'm looking at this is Miami. Yeah, so Miami is on a streak here, and so they're looking good, man. So things are turning up, and then I guess if we feel like who's Dallas likely to play, is it Portland?
Right now it's Portland, but obviously things could shift with the last.
So yeah. Portland's last game's against RSL, and they're on a tie and a loss and 4-game win streak prior to that. So I don't know if this makes any sense. Yeah. This is probably not good podcasting, but you get my point, which is there's very few teams running into this particular MLS playoffs looking like they're in great form.
Yeah, well, the Portland RSL game got flexed to be the big decision day game because those 2 teams are 2 points apart. So winners in, losers out, probably, depending on what Minnesota does. But those guys are basically going head-to-head for a spot. And, that 6, whoever ends up 6 versus 7 is whoever faces Dallas. 6 versus 3 is who you're going to get. Portland, Minnesota, Salt Lake, Vancouver are all alive for 2 spots, 4 teams for 2 spots. In terms of being hot, LAFC stumbled bad like a month ago, but they've kind of pulled it out a little bit. Philly was hotter than hot, and then has a tiny little, blurb here right at the end. But again, it'll depend on who they played. And part of the problem was that they got absolutely wrecked by Charlotte. So like as good as they have felt, they probably overlooked Charlotte and then got spanked for it without having watched that game.
Yeah.
They're probably really kicking themselves about that one, because that'll really wreck your day when somebody that as bad as now Charlotte has gotten good of late, but they still have a terrible record, compared to Philadelphia, and Philadelphia is going to be really upset with themselves, especially if they pull the next one too and they lose 2 straight going in. They're going to be really feeling bad about themselves. But you're right, Montreal's hot, and I think LAFC's rebounded enough after their stumbles that they kind of righted the ship. So I think they're probably going to be back to feeling better. Austin is the one who really is probably not feeling good about themselves at all.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because the irony of all of this is that as Dallas goes into decision day for their 4 p.m. game on Sunday at home against Kansas City, they're facing a team way down on this table, but are on a 3-game winning streak. Now, what's really interesting, and I have to assume Kansas City's kicking themselves in the ass because the schedule really favored them. They had a 3-game homestand to essentially end the season, which they won out, but they had blown so much of the season prior to that ended up being a schedule advantage that was handed to them that was worthless by the time they got to it.
Well, they've actually go back like 8 games without losing. They've won 5 and tied 3 of their last 8. But if you look at their last loss was against Austin way back in August.
That's right.
Look at who they played though. Portland's decent, but San Jose is terrible. LA is decent. Houston bad. DC bad. Minnesota's cratering fast. Seattle's missed the playoffs for the first time forever. So it's like, yes, Sporting is doing good here at the end of the season. Ramis is a solid coach, man. As much as he's annoying, he's a solid coach. He's he's figuring out how to get some results against admittedly not great teams. But talk about a team, compare that to how the schedule Dallas had. That was just brutal all season. And then Kansas City gets this walk-in and then didn't get enough out of it to take advantage of it. They were so far in the hole that they couldn't recover. But, they've climbed off the very basement. Kansas City has at least. But unfortunately, like for Dallas, they're facing a team that is figuring it out at the end. But again, life on the road, right? Coming to Dallas is not easy. Sporting only has 2 wins on the road. So this is, again, if you think you're good, this is a team that you should beat in your home. This shouldn't be a question, this game. That doesn't mean that you can't have that mentality, though. You got to, in the post-game press conference, again, coach said, we've got to get our mentality right for this last game. We got to take care of business ourselves and lock up this home field and do it ourselves on our home field. And we got to be ruthless. And so, he's right. I mean, you got to be ruthless. You can't be bringing these soft plays because we're in and running these soft lineups out there, man. Be ruthless. You got to be ruthless.
Well, and just to drive that point home, Buzz, Kansas City has been crap on the road, even by league standards. They're 2-9-5, 2 wins. They've only won twice. They've tied 5 on the road and lost 9 times. So, Dan, you're going to guarantee an FC Dallas win to finish out the regular season, right?
I mean, you'd hope so, but let's not be
Dan,
crazy.
Come on, man. That's just like so vague of you and just wishy-washy. Can't we get some sort of, positivity out of you?
We just witnessed a really shit game on the road, and the first thing the coach said afterwards was, we had chances to not lose the game.
I know, right? So he said that.
He's looking at it as...
That's a language barrier thing, but...
We just need 1 point. That's all we need. I hope he doesn't do that again. I hope he goes, okay, now we need performances.
All right. Well, so Buzz, before we get into the Pa-Modou Kah, what was your joke off before the
Pa-Modou Kah?
Pa-Modou Kah of the podcast that everybody really cares about, Buzz. Any predictions for the starting lineup? Are we going to get our full? Is Velasco going to play?
Well, he trained. He and Velasco and Nisebeling, Franco Hara are all back from injury training. Kamungo is the only guy missing still. Perel Ariel is back from red card. So you're going to have basically your full contingent. I really hope he doesn't rotate to try and be fresh. I mean, that's ridiculous. You need to annihilate this team and feel good about yourself again. I would not start Velasco myself because you are talking about a thigh leg thing.
Yeah.
So I would
Don't you
let
want him to get a little bit of time under his feet?
I do.
And
I
let
want him
get...
to play. I want him
Okay.
to play. I
You
just don't want him to
him.
start.
Okay.
I would go ahead and because Obrian is at least somewhat capable, and if you bring back Areola with Obrian, that and you have Leggett and you have Cirillo and you have Paxton, that's plenty good. That's close enough to your starting 11 because that's a guy who does occasionally start when there's internationals or whatever. It's a guy that does start when somebody gets banged up. So that's a frontline player. That's different than putting in rotations. Farfan, Martinez, Hedges to Amasi, Paz. Like starting 11 is completely obvious now at this point in the season. Everybody knows in the stands. Everybody knows on the field who it is. So Velasco coming off injury, that's fine. He can stay on. He can come off the bench, but otherwise, you better bring the heat and you better take care of business. And that's all you need to know about that game.
They just need 1 point, right, to solidify third place. Is that correct? Should we do scenarios?
No. Fourth.
Yeah, 1 point gets them home field, which is anywhere in the top 4.
Okay.
Obviously, you would like to be the higher the better, because you don't want LAF, Galaxy, or Nashville. You'd rather have one of these teams that barely made it in, like a Portland or a Salt Lake or something.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Actually, wait, no. 1 point guaranteed stud.
Oh, does it? That's exciting. I
That's
thought it
what
was
I
just
thought.
a home
Yeah.
field.
So
Okay.
right now, if they lose, they can finish 5th. They can also finish 4th, depending on if both. Yeah, because LA would have the tiebreaker on wins. They'd catch up to 50 points with 14 wins to Dallas's 13. If Nashville do it, they'll tie 13 wins, but they'll have goal difference.
Yeah, and what's not working in Dallas's favor is that the Galaxy have to travel to Houston, which, do they even have to go? And Nashville has to go to LAFC, but LAFC's already wrapped everything up.
Well, Houston just beat Nashville. I mean,
Oh.
And before that, they beat New England. They did lose to LAFC pretty soundly. I mean, when you have a team like Houston who's fired their coach and everyone's playing for jobs and they're talking about how they're going to get rid of like half their players. I mean, those guys are fighting for their lives. So you never know what you're going to get, Hector Herrera might play, I guess, versus Chicharito. That's kind of fun. I'm just saying Houston is not a rollover game like you might expect.
Okay.
They are not very good, but
Hey.
since they've changed coaches, I think they've only lost one game, I think.
Since the theme of this has been, how about we go into the playoffs feeling good about ourselves, and maybe the only way you do that is by getting a win over a team that didn't qualify for the playoffs.
Yeah.
Maybe you just get that done, and you don't have to worry about what everybody else does.
No, that's the mentality they got to have, and that's what Coach said.
Good. I'm glad to hear he said that. Hey, a side note. I don't know if you guys saw the article that the good Joe Lowry wrote this week on his Backheeled site about slowest players in the league. Have you seen this? So there's, I guess, somewhere in the stat stuff that he has access to, there's actually a statistic about how top speed. And so he wrote up an article saying who the slowest player across the league was by position. And I thought, oh, yeah, it's a shoo-in. It's absolutely a shoo-in. There's no way Frank O'Hara isn't the slowest striker in Major League Soccer. And I'll be damned if he's not. Guess? Don't, Buzz, are you looking at this? Are you looking this up?
No, I'm listening to your story.
Don't look. Dan, do you know this? Have you already,
No.
Dan, are you lying? Are you looking at it?
No, I'm looking at the table.
Okay, because I'm going to ask, who do you think the slowest striker in Major League Soccer is?
Well, I would have assumed it was Hara or maybe Higuain, but that would be my only two.
Well, okay, those are the two that even he said he thought it would be. Dan, do you have a guess as to who it's not either one of those guys. Who do you think the slowest striker, at least according to the stats, are in Major League Soccer?
I have no idea. Those are the two that would make sense.
This blew me away. According to the stats, it's Freddy Montero of the Sounders.
Oh, yeah, he did have a pretty big injury a couple years ago. I can buy that. I'm surprised by that, but yeah.
There's no way if you line up Higuain, Hara, and Montero in a foot race that Montero loses that to those two old buses.
Maybe he never really sprints in the game. Maybe he just jogs all the time.
Yeah, that's
He
got
just hops around on his one functional leg.
Yeah. He is pretty gimpy these days. I will give him that.
Maybe I haven't watched him closely enough. Maybe I'm thinking of old Freddy Montero, but
Yeah.
the fact that you could age out and slow down that fast, because how old is he compared to those two guys? Is Freddy Montero even 5 years within either one of those guys?
Well, it's more about the injury in his case, but he's older than you think.
He's 35.
Is he really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I
And
guess
Franco
it's
Hara's what, 36? How old's Hara?
Hara's 33.
Oh my God.
I guess with Montero, it's like you think of the time he was at Seattle, and then when he went permanently back to Vancouver in 5 years later, and there's just that gap that everyone forgets about.
Yeah, I guess so. It was very strange. The whole thing was... All right, well, anyway, I didn't mean to derail us, and I know we're frustrating people because we're not getting to the thing everybody wants to hear.
Topic. Yeah, I like it. Yeah.
Anyway, on next week's podcast,
We'll tell you the story of why they got rid of their coach and the second team.
Let's do 15 minutes of kit talk before we do.
oh wow,
Man, that purple and pink looks so kick-ass at
does.
Florida Battle.
Man, it does.
So good. Actually, just to even make it, just to throw in there, I saw. So, have you seen the highlight that's been floating around of the Charlotte Columbus game?
yes,
Yeah.
Of the
that was
magical.
magical.
Yeah, so if you haven't seen it yet, there's a video of the game. Charlotte gets a ball and somebody tries to chip a keeper. The Columbus keeper from half field. The Columbus keeper catches it. Plays it out, they get to half field, and there's a foul, and Zelarayan lines up, and he hits it from just inside the half and chips the keeper from distance, and it is pure MLS madness, and it's great. But the reason why I bring it up is that Charlotte's wearing their, what are they calling that, mint blue or whatever? And, and Columbus is wearing their yellow, and that looks great too.
Yeah.
So it's a very long way to get around to the point I was trying to make.
That was such a funny clip because they try and chip the other keeper, and then their keeper doesn't learn anything from it 5 seconds later. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. You could see it coming, too. You're like, I know what he's doing.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's fantastic stuff. Okay.
That's good.
All right. So 4 o'clock Sunday, decision day, go team go. All right, here we go. Here it is as promised. I don't know how many minutes into the pod, but we're finally going to do it. We found out earlier this week. What day did they announce it, Buzz? Was it one of those middle of the night announcements?
Oh,
what day did it come out? Was it?
God, I don't remember.
Was last Friday? Was it a Friday night news dump thing?
It was on the 30th. What day of the week was the 30th? That's a Sunday. It was on a Sunday.
It was even more of a silent.
During the Cowboy game, basically.
She's a genius.
No, it's 6 p.m. Is it 6 p.m. on no, September 30th was... Oh, I'm looking at the wrong month. It was on Friday. I'm sorry.
All right, so it was a Friday news dump.
6 p.m. on Friday. It's an hour after,
like a pro.
Yeah.
Like that's so
classic
professional.
news dump.
Yes. So the news is that after just one season, despite making the playoffs and all of Buzz's hype, Pa-Modou Kah has been. I guess they claimed it was mutual parting of the ways. But Buzz, I think based on all the noise and shenanigans that you and I and others have been hearing about for some time, this turned out not to be the deep dark secret of the most out of the blue thing that most people probably thought it was.
Yeah, a lot of people were really surprised by this, and what I would say was like, well, I didn't 100% have confirmed that this was coming. I was 95% convinced that it would, and I would have been stunned if he'd have made it to next season as the coach of this team. It would have been stunning to me if he would have. The two things I think you have to really pay attention to are how quickly this happened, number one. And then there's a line in the thing on the website that I want to talk about here in a second that is the number two thing I think you really got to pay attention to. There are two kinds of mutually agreed apart ways. There's the kind that Oscar Pereja had where he's like, hey, I would like to try something new. I'm going to go do something else. And it's like, hey, we love you. Good luck. And then there's the kind that this is, which is we're going to fire you and we have evidence to fire you. But if you'll walk away right now, We'll just call it bygones be bygones. And that's what this is the second of those things, that type.
They have cause to fire him.
Yeah. Or if you don't have legitimate identified cause, it's like, hey, it's not working out. We're going to have to fire you, and this is a competitive business, and you can come up with any reason why you want to pretty much to fire somebody, but we're going to let you walk away rather than getting into a brawl about it because we're not bringing you back.
Well, there's another element to this, and I know this is not the most comfortable thing to talk about, but there is a reality to this, which is there's a big focus within professional sports to make sure that minorities are getting important coaching jobs, right?
Yeah.
And so firing people that you've hired in these positions always put ownerships in really weird situations.
Yeah.
And I think it goes all the way to the point about how some people in managerial positions are in bad situations to give those people reviews because they don't want to be seen as, where I'm going. The whole thing's really, really uncomfortable and unfortunate.
Yeah. And by letting a guy walk away, everybody saves a little face on the deal, and it doesn't make a big splash in the news, you hope, and you don't create a big controversy. But given how fast it has happened, and I think based on some things that happened, I think you'll know that he knew that it was coming. But here's the line in the news site they put up, the news story they put up on their website.
The press release. It's, is it a full release? Is it a story? Whatever it is, it's the same thing these days. There's all these quotes from Matt Denny. By the way, I doubt that Matt Denny made this decision. Just tell everybody who Matt Denny is.
Matt Denny is technically the general manager of North Texas Soccer Club. No offense to Matt Denny, but he's mostly just a business manager. This North Texas Soccer Club is a fake club in the sense that it's FC Dallas, right?
He's the general manager, in the business
of the business sense, right?
Yeah, not a
decisions
director.
are made about. He's not sporting director. He's not a technical director. Those things are all overseen by FC Dallas. This is FC Dallas. This is a decision made by ownership, technical director, big top level organizational decision. This is not Matt Denny's call, despite the fact that his quote's in there.
Okay.
So here's the important part, the next paragraph, the meat of the thing. Second coach in club history. He compiled a 13-7-5 record in his only season and led them to the playoffs. The next line is the kicker. In addition to competing in MLS Next Pro Western Conference, North Texas Soccer Club is a critical player developmental tool for FC Dallas. So why is that line in there? Why did they feel it was necessary to say that? And the answer is because that comes to the heart of the problem. So let's understand first that there are two sides to all stories. With this particular coach, there are players that love this guy. There's players that love playing for him. There are players that improved under him. But at the same time, there are players that hated playing for him and players that got worse under him. And having some players...
But isn't that true with any coach?
It is. It is.
So what was the differentiator here?
Right. I'll get there. This is going to take a while. So the difference is that if your job is to develop players as much or more as it is to win games, if you have guys that are stagnating and you have guys that aren't progressing, that's not good. That's not part of your paradigm is to help everybody, which we'll come back to in a second. So remember how fast it happened and remember that language. Now, here's the big macro level problem. Pa-Modou Kah is a old school coach. He's a in your face. He's a yeller. You remember you guys are, Peter, you will have. You remember the movie Necessary Roughness? Mm-hmm. When the assistant coach takes over for the head coach and he gives a speech at halftime about ripping their heads off and shitting down their necks. That kind of explosive. That's Pa-Modou Kah. That kind of.
So that was Full Metal Jacket.
Yeah, sure. Like Full Metal Jacket. He's that kind of coach. Some guys respond to that and some guys don't. But here's the thing. About mid-season, I started hearing stories that he and Coach Nico Estevez don't get along, that they're like oil and water. And you guys have seen how Coach Nico is. He is new school. He's meticulous. He's a deep dive into tactics, excessive scouting, micromanaging of game plans and other kind of things. Not a yeller, very much a, positivity and level-headed kind of coach. So there's a complete disconnect between the first team and North Texas Soccer Club. And you see this in the players that are down there are pretty much down there full time. They're down there the whole season. Bartlett mostly was down there to play, but he would occasionally come back and forth. But that's really it. You didn't see guys go down on rehab. You didn't see guys go down that were screaming and dying and begging for minutes. Didn't go down. Thomas Roberts at the end of the season finally got to go down once, and then they didn't even play him. So there's a total disconnect, apparently, and I'm hearing this from multiple people across the organization and from outside the organization, that the two don't get along and the clubs are disconnected, and Pa-Modou Kah is basically doing his own thing. So when you come back to the language of this is a developmental team, you have to be, I'm paraphrasing now, you have to be involved with what we're doing on a collective level. You have to be on board with what we're doing on a collective level. Now, I've had conversations with Coach Nico about how this season he mostly concentrated on the first team, and then he'll begin expanding his control and influence out to other parts of the organization this winter. So that lays the groundwork for you. And now we can get into specifics. Some of these stories I can't tell because I'm only hearing it secondhand and I don't have enough firsthand evidence to tell it. So I'm only going to tell the ones I heard from like 5 different people and that I have direct evidence to demonstrate that the story is likely true. And I'm going to tell you these things so that we understand the kind of context surrounding this coach and why they wanted to go a different direction. So about a third of the way into this season, perhaps, maybe closer to halfway.
Do we need to ask children to turn off the podcast?
No, it's not that kind. It's not that bad.
Okay, all right.
Derek Waldeck, who is captain of the team, goes to human resources and complains about the way Pa-Modou Kah is coaching, the old schoolness of it. I mean, I'm not in that meeting, but the yelling, the confrontationalism, the punishment kind of stuff. Basically, he formally complains to the organization. And after that, you can go look at the sheet. He did not play, basically, ever again. He went from being a guy that you could rely on as a 6, as a left back. Now, this season, if you remember early, you probably don't, Peter, because you don't pay enough attention to them, which is fine. But they have Isaiah Parker down there who's getting almost all the minutes at left back, as he should, because he's their new generation Adidas player they picked. But they've struggled all year for a 6. And earlier in the year, they used Waldeck there, and then all of a sudden they quit completely. And they used Blaine Ferry. They used 4 or 5 different academy kids. They eventually had to trade for a guy.
But didn't Waldeck leave the team?
He did. He eventually left by mutual termination. That means he went and asked to leave. He said, please let me out of my contract. That's how bad it got, was that and you guys know Waldeck. He's a phenomenal leader, absolutely phenomenal piece for the organization, helped guys in the locker room, helped the club. I wanted him to be a coach so badly, and he basically walked away from the organization because of this coach. So he obviously, I'm just reading between the leaves on this part, he obviously lined himself up a new deal because the minute they let him go, he signed with somebody else. So they let him, the organization said, you're right, you're getting screwed, have fun, good luck to you. And so he left.
So, all right, all right, keep going. Sorry.
Okay,
I don't want to.
I have question time at the end. All right, story number 2. Do you remember in the middle of the season when Blaine Ferry vanished?
Yes, the curious case of missing Blaine Ferry.
Okay.
Yes.
So I've heard it from enough people that I'm going to say what happened is that Blaine Ferry was late to practice. How much he was late depends on who told me the story. So it varied by a considerable margin. Now, admittedly, Blaine Ferry has had off-field stuff limit his development as a professional, right? It's never been his play that's been the problem. It's always been discipline of a personal nature, whether it was like he wasn't fit enough or whatever else. So he was late, and rather than just saying kangaroo court fine or you're not going to start one game, allegedly, Kah kicked him out of practice for 2 weeks and wouldn't let him train. And then when he did come back, he was not selected for the 18 for like a month. And
yeah, because I remember that there was a run of
Yeah.
games where you kept tweeting the lineup for every game, going, "Where in the
Where's
world is
Blaine?
Blaine Ferry?"
Yeah, because he's arguably the best player on that team. He's definitely the best midfielder on that team by a long shot. And he wasn't even in the 18, and then he was in the 18 and not playing. They're significantly better when he played. And it came at an important part of the season. So there's a story that goes with that the organization as a whole arranged for him to have a way to work up there at the complex and get prepped and be ready and be fit without going to that training. The organization saw that he was taken care of away from North Texas Soccer Club practices. And then the last story I heard that I am willing to talk about is with Lucas Bartlett, who admittedly is not a great soccer player. We've talked about this, but Kah, allegedly, I heard this story twice too, kicked him out of practice for a bad pass. Now, I've seen a kid get kicked out of practice for mouthing off at the coach. I've seen him get kicked out of practice for getting in a fight with a teammate. I've never seen somebody get kicked out of practice for stinking, right? Well, unless they weren't a professional player, unless they were just some random guy. But the bottom line is that, Bartlett's a guy that the club wants to develop in, invest time in, and see if they can get him up to an MLS standard, because a lot of the pieces are amazing. It's just the whole is not there. Blaine Ferry is a guy that was good enough to go to Germany at 18. Is a guy they want to invest in, and probably now he's burnt with this club and he's out of contract. Derek Waldeck, I considered an asset to the organization, not as a player, but as a leader and maybe a potential coach, gone. So again, go back to the language of the story, that it's a critical developmental tool for FC Dallas. Why do you bother to put that line in there if that's not really important? Because otherwise that's just a nonsense filler line. Maybe it's a nonsense filler line, but knowing what I knew about this situation, I don't think that's a nonsense filler line at all. So the bottom line is that there's a total disconnect between that club and the organization. It was not working as a developmental tool coming up from the academy. There was only one or two academy players that got any amount of minutes and used it to progress. One of them is my guy, Nolan Norris. So everybody else came and went. Nobody really. Santiago Ferreira played quite a bit. I'll give you that one. That was a good run too. You guys didn't say that, but it just popped into my head. So it's the disconnect. It's the problem. And the bottom line is, if one player, and I'm sure that there were others, are talking to human resources or whatever else, there's obviously a massive problem. And I'm sure the organization will deny a whole lot of this, and maybe he'll deny it. But I heard it so many different times from different people that I came to believe it was all good. And it was all from people that were connected enough that I know that it's legitimate, at least legitimate noise. But again, there are two sides to the thing. He did get him into the playoffs. Granted, they take it more seriously than anybody else does as an organization. There are some players that progressed. Colin Smith notably progressed quite a bit. I liked him. Parker, the way he progressed, looked pretty good. Obviously Kamungo and Mulatto looked pretty good in terms of the way they progressed. Hope Kudzo does. But then there are a bunch of other guys that went backwards and didn't progress. And I think when you have the relationship, when you have these stories about conduct of the coach in the locker room, on the sideline, when you hear these things, the writing's on the wall that that's not a fit with the organization that makes any sense. And that's the bottom line, is he's a totally different coach than Nico. And I don't think Nico picked him. So I imagine this is all part of it.
All right. Now, Buzz, because you are a good and fair, just in general, human being, I think it's fair to throw out there that you are redacting other stories that you have heard that are far more alarming and problematic, because we don't have honest journalistic full-on sources for it. But the collection of all those things individually, along with all the things that we have, or you have sourced out, really, really help paint a picture, again, getting back to my original point, of the difficulties of being the Hunts, frankly, in firing a minority that they hired less than a year ago.
Yeah, there's one or two stories that I've left out that I cannot believe the guy survived as long as he did, if they're true. But again, I didn't witness it, and I haven't talked to anybody that actually witnessed it. So it could be someone's making it up. It could be that like, oh, that the way I heard it is not what really happened. You know, it's like
Sure.
you hear two sides of a story and you're like, is that really what he did? You know, again, and I'm not trying to paint untrue stories, which is why some of these things I don't want to talk about them. But the ones I told are the ones that I heard multiple times from multiple people. So I feel pretty confident about it because there are people that I know that have legitimate connections and know people that were in the room, you know, so it's like there's enough smoke here. And then when you combine it with the language and you combine it with what we do witness on the sideline, we combine what we know about him as a coach and we know what Nico about as a coach and we know about the organizational philosophy. All those things are why I would have been stunned that he would have come back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I really feel strongly that you can't discount the scenario in which they've hired, you know, of a league that is in a situation where it is incredibly sensitive about hiring people of head, you know, frankly, just hiring minorities for head coaching jobs and then being put in a position where you have to make a decision to fire that person less than 12 months later. That has to be the only way that happens in 2022, in my opinion, is if you've got a litany of evidence and a legitimate cause for making it happen, especially in the way that they did it without trashing him and just saying, hey, we're just going to part ways, which is your original point in all this.
Yeah. When you look at his record in his one season, getting in the playoffs, you know, pretty good winning record.
Yeah.
It
just adds to the story.
Yeah. There's no way they can do it if they don't have layers and layers of evidence. And they've given him clearly to me with this, how fast it was and the fact they're just letting him out of the deal. They probably presented him with the evidence and he's like, okay, I'll just walk away. I'm not going to fight that, you know, and then they put the language in there that makes you say, okay. And, you know, if you can read the tea leaves, you can, even without the stories I told, if you can read the tea leaves, you could have seen this. If you're close enough to the clubs, you could see it.
Yeah. Well, I think also the fact that to the best of my knowledge, he has said nothing about this. There was some interesting reaction in the aftermath. Like if you paid attention to social media, there were kind of multiple, senses that maybe people knew something or had known things prior about him that were like, really? Okay, well, he has a history and things like that. And like, okay, well, we didn't know that because, you know, based on our reaction to them hiring him, this may turn out to be one of the greatest milkshake ducks of all time. Just that he just turned out not to be the person that we thought he was or hyped him at the beginning.
Well, the weird one was when I heard it from people outside the organization, when I would be talking to a coach at another club, you know, or a player personnel guy at another club, which I know a couple of people around the league. And I was like, man, there's some weird stuff going on here that I'm like, I heard. And I'll be like, wow, you heard? I was like, how did you hear? You know? So, I mean, cause coaches all know each other. They talk, you know, I think, I had enough people reach out to me afterwards saying, you know, yes, this had to happen, that kind of thing. You know, it's clear that it was going to happen one way or another. And it's all parties have agreed it's not right. And like I said before, I try to be impartial about these things. And there are guys that love him. And there probably are going to be organizations that love this style, this in-your-face, confrontational, old-school style. There are guys that are going to respond to that. I don't doubt that this guy won't have any trouble getting a job somewhere because he has a pretty good record. You know, and there are guys that have responded. It's just not or fit here.
All right. But considering what has been going on in not just Major League Soccer, but in NWSL in the last 24 hours, and I'm not saying that anything related to Kah is anything of that level, but in terms of being overly aggressive in your coaching style, I do wonder if that is going to create a problem for him moving forward.
Well, you know, if you're a coach that yells at people and gets on them hard and you know, it has that old school vibe. I mean, I'm talking like Shellis, but stronger. Yeah. You know, that in a modern game, that doesn't always fly anymore, you know, and if you're talking about coaching a professional men, which North Texas is on the verge of being. Some of these kids are kids. Some of them are not. Waldeck definitely was not. Waldeck, you can see, clearly did not take that sitting down like a 15-year-old might, you know. So there are lots of things to consider here in those regards. I doubt that he'll be listing Dallas for references. At the same time, if someone calls and says, hey, what happened, there's probably only so much that the team could even talk about because of the internal privacy of an organization. But, I'm sure they won't be giving him a positive review. I doubt. But I think there's enough, even if people don't believe me, I'd like to think that I have enough of a track record that people will believe what I'm telling you. But even if they don't, read the release and look at the record and wonder to yourself what happened. And particularly if it takes him a while to get a job, that might be telling, perhaps. I mean, maybe he'll land him right away, but there's enough smoke here in the language, and there's enough smoke here in the what happened with Waldeck and what happened with Blaine Ferry. There's some clear evidence here of these things that I'm talking about. Even if you just watch the way he conducts himself on the sideline and compare it to Nico, compare it to Lucci, compare it to whoever you want. Every coach is different. You can see what he's like as a coach and how it doesn't match.
It's a classic read between the lines scenario.
100%. Even if you don't, I have legitimate stories to back it up, but even if you don't believe those, read between the lines and you'll see it.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate reality.
I was really excited when they hired this guy because of his track record in terms of winning. Coach of the year, won a championship, has progressed some young players, brought a guy here that he likes and developed. There's some guys that like playing here. It's just these weird stories started coming to me, starting about third to halfway into this season. I started getting this.
Yeah.
I told you guys about it at the time. I was like, remember? I was like, there's some weird stuff going on here. The stories kept getting worse and worse and worse as the season went on. And one of the ones at the end that was kind of weird was a story about Kamungo being on a minute limitation and Pa just ignoring it and playing him whatever he wanted to. I was like, it's almost like he's throwing it back in their faces at this point, like he knew it was coming.
Isn't that the one that involved Thomas?
Yeah, it was the game Thomas didn't play. And the weird thing was they put Kamungo in the place Thomas would have played. And it's like, what? Just play Thomas. Like, why is he down there? Why did you take him?
Yeah,
if you're not going to play him.
He ended up. Yeah, it was like throwing. It was like killing two birds with one stone. Let's piss him off in two ways. Let's not play the player that should play, and play the player that shouldn't be playing. Yeah. Yeah,
when you start bucking the organizational requests, and it comes down to, and listen, again, go back and look at how many players that were dying for minutes went and played.
Yeah,
they sent Hernandez out on loan instead, which they did early, which is fine. But then Khalil never went down. Thomas went down once and actually got into a game. Go through the list of anybody else. Quinones never went down there and played. Bartlett did, but he was down for most of the year playing for the most part. So,
well, Dan and I have talked a lot about this, but we just want to tell you that we're really, really, really relieved that you never got that hug.
I did meet him, I got introduced to him. But
if you'd gotten the hug, you guys would have developed this friendship, and then this would have happened, and your heart would have been broken.
I don't think he's a hugger.
And we just, well, not in that sense, no. So it's too bad that it worked out this way. Do you have any idea who they're going to hire to replace him?
Oh, no clue. I would imagine that it'll be somebody that Nico wants. There's a couple of organizational candidates. Like, if this organization likes to develop coaches too. Michelle's been there a couple of years as the lead assistant. Mm-hmm. He probably would be good. Alex Aldaz is my favorite academy coach. He'd be great. Chewy, who's the coach, the first team coach who's responsible for progression of players from the academy to the first team. That's kind of his bailiwick. He'd be probably really good. Hell, Marco. There's internal guys around. Mm. I imagine it'll be someone that Nico wants. Like, he has a guy on his staff who's a former academy coach that's in charge. That's here. Basically, his title is
Thomas Tuchel's available.
Thomas Tuchel's available. Yeah.
Sam Allardyce is.
He has
available.
A guy that's in charge of scouting and film, and I was also assistant coach. That guy is a former academy coach. That guy probably would be a good candidate. Nico's probably knows people from the national team or knows people from Crew or from.
Hey Dan, who's available?
Who would that
Buzz
be?
Carrick.
Oh no, I don't have a license.
Oh, that's right.
Do you know who else is available?
Who?
Former Luton Town, Sacramento Republic head coach and Mr. Rebecca Lowe, Paul Chuckle Fuck Bucky.
Man, I would love to hear the song that you sang in the supporters groups with that name.
I already lived here, though.
Oh, okay. You didn't sing them while you watched them on iFollow?
We were in the conference then, so watching games were few and far between.
Okay, all right. Well, I hope we didn't overhype that segment, Buzz.
I hope I did it fair justice without crossing lines, because that was a tough one to walk. Because honestly, I'm telling you, I've known that there was fire here for half a season, and I was 100% convinced in my head there's no way he's getting through this offseason. I was slightly caught off guard by how fast it was. He didn't even make it through the rest of the week, which I'll tell you something, how quickly they moved.
Well, am I wrong in saying he's not commented publicly or posted any kind of statements? I haven't seen anything.
They haven't even done the roster moves yet, and they already gutted him. So it's like, it's
Yeah.
quick.
Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dan.
I was going to say it probably makes sense to get out ahead of the Yates report for the NWSL deal if you're talking about abuse in any form, and
Yeah.
suddenly heads are rolling and people are saying, well, my kid's some parent goes public and goes, my kid underwent this with Kah. Something needs to happen to FC Dallas, and Zanata needs to go for burying it, and it can become a very messy situation, as Portland have found out for being absolute disgusting assholes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't want to go as far as to paint any of it as abuse, because I'm not privy to the details of any of it. But when you have a player go to human resources, and so that's an environment where that has happened, and yet you still have 15, 16-year-old kids in that environment too, it raises questions.
Just go back though. Like, abuse takes many forms, right? It's we've obviously seen the worst side, the far more severe side, sexual abuse and everything else with the NWSL stuff. But that can also be, yelling at a kid in a locker room. That is psychological abuse. It just is. That's
Let me. I just feel, to be completely fair to Mr. Kah, and because we keep talking and using this word abuse and relating to the stories that are happening literally in real time with the NWSL, nothing that we have heard, nothing that we're intimating or referring to has anything to do with quote unquote sexual abuse. This is This is all how you treat people as a human being kind of stuff.
Yeah.
There's some various levels of that, and that we'll avoid getting specific on, but none of it is sexual in nature. And I just feel like, just to be completely fair and clear, I don't want anybody walking away from this podcast thinking that he was doing something creepy. All right, so there you go.
No, that's true. And there are just as many players that absolutely loved playing for the guy and thought he was fantastic as there are that didn't. There are lots of people that are of an older generation that would think that you were absolutely crazy to be complaining about what the guy's doing, but the world is different now.
Yeah, and your analogy about Shellis Hyman is not a bad one, because, man, I'm telling you, in all the years of being in Dallas, with Shellis being here through his time both at SMU and at the MLS team, it literally slices right down the middle. The people that would walk through a fire for that guy, and the other people that would push him into a fire if they thought it would hurt him.
And sometimes the same person in the space of about 3 years.
Yeah.
I can think of the way Daniel Hernandez went from walk through a wall to that was more
drop a wall on him.
Perhaps,
Yeah.
But
So, well, okay. Well, thanks for putting that out there, Buzz. I know everybody is. That's all good information. And yes, to answer your question, I thought you did that extremely fairly.
Thanks.
And professionally. So good on you. All right. Anything else we need to talk about now that we've killed off an hour of curiosity?
There's a whole bunch of stuff for the off season, but we need to kind of wait for that for the off season. So
yeah, we
got a big game this weekend, and the off season started early for North Texas, but so we're down to just focusing on FC Dallas, one more game, and then a big playoff game, a home playoff game. Hopefully that'll be exciting.
Okay, Dan, do you have a particular opponent you're hoping Dallas gets for the playoffs?
No, I've been trying to figure this one out all evening. No, maybe Minnesota can beat Vancouver and get into position.
Okay. I don't have a particular choice yet. I have to think about that a little.
Actually, wait, no, forget Minnesota. They seem to have Dallas's number.
Yeah. Is there somebody that you feel like doesn't have Dallas's number?
Salt Lake, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Okay. All right. Fair enough.
Third Degree the podcast was brought to you by Soccer90.com. Check out all of the FIFA World Cup new arrivals, including the US men's national team jerseys, tees, and scarves. In addition to US gear, Soccer90 has new France, England, Brazil gear, and much more. Shop Soccer90.com today, and as listeners to the podcast, you get 20% off your purchase when you use code Third Degree at checkout. Some exclusions may apply.
Well, very good. Thank you to you both. Good podcasting content on a Wednesday evening for Thursday broadcast or publish.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Buzz.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for hosting.
Yes, thank you, FC Dallas Curious fan. We will speak to you next week after Decision Day Sunday on the next edition of Third Degree, the podcast.
Wait, where was the cat talk?
Woo! Woo! Third Degree, the Third Degree Net Podcast. Third Degree, the Third Degree Net Podcast. Third Degree, Third Degree Net Podcast. Third Degree Net Podcast. 25 long hard years, yeah. Buzz Carrick, yeah, the man. 25 years, you better be giving this man at least $5 a month. Patreon Third Degree, come on, pay the man. It's the only comprehensive coverage of my fucking club that I love so much. Hey, come on, it's Third Degree or bust. Yes, give the man some money. Hey, Third Degree Net Podcast.